Our last section for tonight, we're going to discuss salary schedules. And if you remember last time, we talked about the fact that your schools now have a new minimum requirement for teacher salaries of $50,000. You know, when I think about my past experience as a superintendent, I think about being attached to a salary schedule and having to go by that salary schedule all the time. Sometimes was not the best thing in the world. Sometimes we'd like to do something different. However, now that you have the freedom to do whatever you want, and if I was a superintendent now, I might say, oh, wait a minute, you know, it's a lot easier to stick with what we've had in the past. So we're going to take a look at what salary schedules have looked like in the past, what your requirements are currently, and then what your options are for the future. So I was asked to do this presentation last summer at a co-op for superintendents, and I got to thinking about, you know, really they're wanting to do things differently. And but I saw this cartoon I thought was pretty funny. You know, you got a boss here saying, I want you to do something bold and innovative, but I want you to do it exactly the same way we've been doing it for 25 years. You think about salary schedules, we've been doing them the same way for a really, really long time. So the current steps and lanes salary schedules was actually established in the 1920s. So for over 100 years, we've been using the same type of salary schedules that basically work like this. If you work here one additional year, you're going to get a raise. If you get a master's degree or any kind of maybe a specialist degree or a doctorate, any kind of a different degree, then we may pay for that as well. And that's typically what most salary schedules look like for a very, very long time. There's been a lot of changes in the last 100 years. So here's that traditional step salary schedule that I showed you. This was back when the starting salary was even well below 36 at this time. I think when I pulled this, I think the starting salary at that time was actually 32,000 when I actually pulled this salary schedule. But this was a district that had paid for 19 years of experience, and if you got a bachelor's degree plus 15 hours, or if you got a master's degree, you got an increase. And that's probably an example from a smaller school district. Here's an example from a larger school district. Typically what you'd see is that it would pay for a few more years of service. It goes actually out to 40 years, 24 for a bachelor's, but up to 40 years if you had your doctorate. And then of course increases for each of those different educational attainments at the top. So that's kind of what usually some of the bigger school districts' salary schedules look like. But once again, not much difference between the two. That's what salary schedules look like for a long time. As one guy said to me one time, as long as that person is breathing, didn't get fired, and comes back for the next year, then they're guaranteed. That doesn't always feel so great when we know we have a teacher knocking the top out of it, getting a lot of growth and performance out of their students, and they get the same pay increase as the person that maybe is not doing as good a job. That's been one of the criticisms of traditional salary schedules over the years. So let's think about all the major changes over the last 100 years. Salary schedules hadn't changed, but obviously vehicles have changed a lot. Now I wouldn't mind having that vehicle on the left. I think that would be worth a lot of money today, and I would enjoy having it. But you know, the air conditioner probably doesn't work very good in a vehicle like that, right? So we're used to all these new gadgets, and we like the new gadgets, we like the new features in vehicles, and we don't complain a whole lot about changes that we've had in vehicles over the last 100 years. Same thing for telephones. You guys are all carrying a phone tonight probably. Many of you are watching this maybe on a phone. And it's also your personal computer that you can access all kinds of information with. You can make reservations, you can make phone calls, you can use it for maps, right? So that's a far cry from what you could do with that old telephone on the left over there. And you guys, some of you guys remember party lines of the past, those type of things, where you had to wait your turn to actually get on a phone call. Once again, we love all the improvements in technology with phones. And then finally, what about shopping? You know, we don't have to go into a store anymore to shop. We do a lot of our shopping online. We do the shopping, it's delivered to our home the next day or sometimes even the same day. I ordered something from Amazon the other day that had the option of getting it later that afternoon. And I passed on that, so I'll take it again. I'll take it tomorrow, right? But shopping has changed and it will never be the same. Phones have changed, never be the same. Cars have changed, and they will continue to evolve. And as humans, we're usually pretty happy with it anything that evolves technology-wise or that makes our lives more convenient. However, we get stuck in a rut sometimes with some other things, and salary schedules has been one of those things. So I think the first thing to think about when we think about creating new types of salary schedules is we need to have a positive fiscal culture in our schools. So how do we have a positive fiscal culture? First thing is we need to have a staffing model that determines our employee pay. All staffing models determine our employee pay. And it's simply this: the more employees we have, the less money we'll have available to pay those employees. And the less employees we have, the more money we'll have to pay those employees. It's a very simple formula, but your staffing model determines, how much you're going to be able to pay your employees. I know that one of the goals that we always had when I was a school superintendent with the board was we wanted to pay more than the minimum salary requirement in the state of Arkansas. Typically try to be above that as much as $3,000 to $4,000 each year. That was a goal, right? You couldn't do that if you had 5 or 10 extra employees. You had to have a really good staffing model. One of the things you're up against right now is we have the LEARNS Act. We know that things are changing. We got some money for those employees that were on staff on September 1st of 2022, but we really don't know how that's going to change going forward. So we don't know exactly how we're going to tackle our salary schedules going forward. However, this formula will always be in play, no matter if we're using the LEARNS Act, we're using a funding formula we've had for years, or if we change the funding formula going forward. If we want to be able to pay people more with the dollars we get, we can't have an employee that doesn't, that we don't necessarily need. Also, I think what goes along with this is the idea of high expectations for our staff. If we hire people and they know they're not going to have a lot of extra people, everybody's going to have to wear some, wear maybe more than one hat and do their work and do it well. And if you do it well, then you're going to be rewarded, and that reward is going to come with the idea of a high paycheck. We're going to pay employees as much as we possibly can, or give bonuses or other things as well. So I think those two are tied together. One of the things that boards can do, superintendents can do to have a positive fiscal culture is to fund salaries first. And you say, well, that's what we always do. Salaries are that's where most of our money goes. Yeah, absolutely, it is. But we got to think about it on the front end. What are our goals? What do we want to pay? Do we want to pay more than the surrounding schools around us? Do we want to pay more than the state minimum? What are our goals for funding salaries? That's very important. And we talk about those when we're superintendents and school boards, when we talk about our performance targets and our evaluations of superintendents. What do we want to see with regards to salaries in our school? What percentage of funding are used for salary and benefits? We talked about that in the past. I've showed you those charts. We typically try to spend somewhere between 80 to 85% of your foundation funding and your special salary funding for salary and benefits. If you get way out of line and you don't have enough money to take care of your buildings, your other operations, then you've done a great job of funding salary first, but you don't have anything for the rest of the operations for your school district. So it has to have a balance, right? And then finally, what percentage of foundation funding increases will be used to increase the base salary? We got $205 increase to our foundation funding this year. This year is not a great example because there's a lot of changes with the LEARNS Act and a lot of different requirements. But let's fast forward to next year. And let's say you get another increase, which we know already you're going to get an increase next year, right? When we get that increase next year, and we go from $7,618 up to $7,771, what percentage of that increase are you going to add to your base salary? Now the answer may be, we're not going to add a dime. Our situation will not allow for it. We're currently overstaffed. We're trying to reduce our number of employees. We have some facility issues that we need to take care of, whatever the case may be. But I think a really good idea and a really good model is we're going to take a certain percentage or an amount each time that we get a salary increase and add it to the base salary. That way our base salary does not become stagnant at any time. And you can easily do that. I think back to kind of the formula for that when I was a superintendent. We knew what $1,000 increase in salaries was going to cost us as a district. And that was typically somewhere between $75,000 and $80,000. So we could look at our new funding and how much ever funding increase we received per student, multiply that by the number of students we have. We know how much new funding we're going to get for next year. We look at all the positives of any new funding for next year, minus any negatives for increases in funding for next year. Put that out, and then say, hey, look, we know we can afford this much of an increase to our base teacher salary for next year. It might have turned out not to be a $1,000 increase. Maybe it was a $500 increase. Maybe it was a $250 increase. The fact is, anytime we get a foundation funding increase, I think we need to take a look at the idea that some of that increase goes to the base salary. That way we're not stagnant, we're not sitting still. I think that's where school districts have gotten in trouble sometimes over the years, is not making any kind of increase to the base salary unless the state required that action by law. Got to know our revenue sources. We have to have a good idea of where all our money comes from. Obviously those are the four major areas: state, categorical, local, and federal. Those change from time to time. There's different things that happen that cause those to change. Many of your assessments may be going up. Sometimes assessments are going down. That impacts your local money a lot. We know what foundation funding is going to do. We'll need to watch the legislative sessions going forward with regards to categorical funds. Categorical funds are kind of like a weighted fund for certain things, but there's been talk in the legislature about changing that up and having actual weights on different students going forward. In federal funds, there's never a guarantee those federal funds will continue to come in at the same rate that they have in the past, but we got to know how we use all those different funds. How much goes to salaries, how much goes to operations of the school and school supplies, those types of things. I mentioned, knowing where you spend your money, how you spend your money. So what do we do with these funds, right? So I always like to use this example of foundation funding, and now we've changed this chart. Actually, it's foundation funding plus your teacher equalization funds plus your new raise funds versus how much do we spend in Fund 1000, which is teacher salary, and how much we spend in Fund, in 2000, which is operating. For this school district, we just quick example for 23, foundation funding plus the equalization funding was $7 million. We spent more than that, right? So that had a negative $719,000 once they paid their salaries, operated their school, versus what the state gave them for salaries and for foundation funding. Now, fortunately for the school, they have excess debt service of $441,000. They had additional dollars above the URT that we talked about during the last session with Jim Robb. So you know how that kind of works. So they had a net funding for the year. They were positive $460,000. You need to know this story for your district, because your district is not the same as every other district is out in the state. 234 districts, 234 different stories. But you have to know this story before you know how much money you have to spend on salaries. Another couple examples I mentioned quite often, I mentioned earlier, spending around 80% of your foundation funding on salary and benefits. And I say foundation funding, I now include both those extra salary funds that we give. We look at two different districts here. One spending 98% of those funds on salary and benefits, one spending 83%. We don't know the whole story, but obviously the school with 98% may not have as much money for other school operations as the school with 83%. Doesn't necessarily mean one of those is paying more than the other, because there's a lot of other issues that come into play there. So what are some other things we need to consider when we talk about making a good salary schedule? And that is, what's our current situation with our student population? Are we growing? Are we adding more students? Are we declining? What kind of facility needs do we have? Those vary widely from school to school. What's our local competition with regards to trying to hire employees as well? And then the most important thing I think about at this point is, what do we value as a school board, as a community, as a superintendent, when we're working together to make a new salary schedule. Most of you guys did a really good job of taking your time, not jumping into anything real quick with a new salary schedule. You saw the new requirement's $50,000. You met that requirement by doing pretty much the minimum at this point because there's so many uncertainties with the LEARNS Act. We don't know how much everything's going to cost our district at this point. But as we move forward now and we get more answers to that, one of the things we want to look at with our salary schedules is let's pay for what we value. That's the important, that's the really, to me, the best thing about the new options that we have is we can change our salary schedules based on what we value locally. So what might a salary schedule look like looking forward? So I said, we had these steps and lanes in the past. Right now we've just kind of paused. We're meeting the minimum requirements. What can we do in the future? And the good answer here is you can do anything you want to. Every school district has a lot of options in front of them, and they can make those decisions based upon what works for them and what their goals are. Now the only requirement is, once again, we have to pay a minimum salary of $50,000, and those teachers that worked with your district last year had to make $2,000 more than they did this year than they did last year. Going forward, that $50,000 is the only minimum. So that's the only requirement. So you can recreate that salary schedule just like it was before. As you get more money and foundation funding comes back in, you can put those steps and lanes back in there. That's not a problem. Nothing wrong with that. Or you can look to do something different. We can talk about advantages and disadvantages of a traditional salary schedule. They're really easy to implement, those old steps and lanes. There's no discussion about what anybody makes. It's not hard to determine why someone makes this salary. Everybody knows what they're going to get for the next 20 years. I think implementing the new salary schedule, the first thing you do is take your time. Most of you have done a really good job with that. You're not going in there and changing your salary schedule for the future a lot right now. You may implement some of it this year. You may implement even more next year. A lot of you are doing a good job of getting your staff involved, your personnel policy committees, other staff members, having conversations about what new salary schedules might look like going forward, what our constraints are on our new salary schedules, because we know that we don't have an unlimited amount of money going forward, but we can just share that information with our staff and talk to them about pros and cons of new salary schedules. We got to study the fiscal impact of what any new item that we put into the salary schedule is going to cost us. What if we put something in there for retention and 100% of our employees come back? What is that going to cost us? And then the last thing I think we got to do, keep it as simple as possible. It's not going to be as simple maybe as in the past, but we don't want to have to hire a scorekeeper to keep up with everything or not be able to explain it to our staff. Here are some things that we might do. We can look at specific levels of student academic growth and performance. So we might set a goal, just like we did in those superintendent performance items that we might put in the contract. We might also set some goals for our employees or for a building that we want to see a certain amount of growth or performance levels for a whole building. Or we might want to do it for our individual teachers that test certain tested areas. So we might have the opportunity for a teacher to gain more funds or more stipends due to the fact their students reached a certain growth level. People really don't sometimes get a little caught up in that individual thing. They don't like the idea that one person's going to make more than the other. Well, fine. Don't do it that way if you don't want to. Let's do it for the whole building. If the whole building grows, the whole building meets a certain growth or performance level, then let's pay everybody in the building. Some of you guys are familiar with Cross County School District. Nathan Moore, superintendent there, has been using a model like this for quite some time. It's not a lot of money that teachers qualify for. Many times it's as low as maybe $1,000 or $2,000 difference. I'm going to show you one in a minute that's much better than that. But it's not so much about the pay sometimes, it is about the culture, the high expectations, and wanting to do the best we can for students. I mentioned individual performance pay. We'll look at that. Teacher value-added growth. There's a lot of information out there about how a teacher impacts a student. Does a student grow 1 year during that school year that you have? There's a value-added model out there that you can access to determine how their teachers are doing. You also have our DOTS program at APSRC. We have a DOTS program that gives you all kinds of information about student performance and teacher performance as well. You might look at evaluation scores. So, we've had evaluations for a long time in this state. We use tests and we have different levels of evaluation, but sometimes our evaluations don't always match maybe the student performance or the teacher performance and their students' performance. I do a lot of training with Dr. Bob Thompson out of Texas. He comes to Arkansas and does trainings for us a lot of times. And what Dr. Thompson says about this is this: your evaluation scores for your teachers should match the letter grade that your school receives on average. Now, you'll have teachers that perform higher than that. You may have a C school, but you have a teacher performing really high. You may have a C or B school and you have a teacher performing really low. But on average, your teacher evaluation shouldn't be up there all in level 4 or almost perfect, and you're a C or D school. Because by definition of the evaluation of the school, then those teacher evaluations should not be that high. He also makes a statement that our acceptance level, for what level of acceptance we'll have for performance by a teacher in our school, is the performance level of the lowest teacher on our staff. I know it's hard to think of it that way because we love all our teachers and we work with them, they're our community members, but we also have to have high enough expectations that we won't sit back and just let mediocrity or poor performance continue in our school district. We also might want to look at student or peer reviews. Not something that I probably would want to do myself, but I've seen it in some salary schedules across the states. Some of you that went to college may be familiar with this. You actually rated your professor at the end. I'm not a big proponent of that. I've seen some that have that. We're very familiar with paying for more responsibilities. So you got department chairs, mentors, or other leadership positions, stipends for those kind of things. We're very familiar with those. You can have those in salary schedules. You might also add more money for hard-to-staff schools or hard-to-staff subject areas. So special education comes to mind. I see a lot of ads for this in the local papers here in the central part of the state. I know the Jacksonville School District, before this school year started, they had ads in the paper, $5,000 sign-on bonus for special education teachers, $2,000 increase in pay for those teachers as well. You also may have certain schools, if you're a large district, that you have hard to fill positions. You might also pay your staff for completing some very specific professional development activities. You have a new initiative in mind, you have something you want your teachers to get trained in, you want to incentivize that, you could add funding for that. Advanced degrees, you're very familiar with those, you can still pay for those, and then additional duties, of course. So I threw in a couple ideas of what schools are used to paying for, what they've paid for in the past with stipends or additional duties. And this is one salary schedule that I pulled out that had these additional stipends or additional multipliers for administrative positions. And you can see that most of those deal with extra duties, after school, sports, that type of thing, right? Here's another example that's almost all, I think it is almost all, either student clubs or sports. So I guess my point here would be, we are familiar with paying people for doing something extra or doing something different, but pretty much we've been focused on after school activities or sports. What I think we should probably take a look at going forward is maybe these same kind of incentives on the academic side. So not really for working more, but for better outputs, better performance by our employees. Some people don't like to think about salaries that way. They don't like to think about paying teachers that way. I understand that completely. But I know a lot of our business world works in that way. If you've ever worked in a different business other than a school, you'll know that everybody doesn't make the same salary. They may have the same job title. They don't make the same salary, right? There's also different performance stipends out there. So if an employee does certain things, they get certain bonuses or certain different stipends. So it might put the education world more in line with the business world. Some people think that's a really great idea. Some people think that's a terrible idea. Once again, it doesn't matter which way you believe or what you believe, because you have the choice. You don't have to do what everybody else does anymore. You make your own salary schedule. Here's a couple other things to consider. Maybe you can pay into a health savings account. I know that didn't go on his salary, and that didn't help somebody's teacher retirement. I don't even know if it's legal, I'll tell you that. I didn't even ask our attorneys yet. But I do know some businesses that do that kind of thing, and it works for them. You might do it. You might pay more for your employee's insurance. You've always had that option. And then you might do part-time or flexible schedules. We work in a different world than we worked in just a few years ago. Even COVID just a few years ago changed a lot of the ways that people work. So you may have flexible schedules. You may hire teachers that come in half a day. They may work in the afternoons only, or they may work in the mornings only. Once again, up to you. You may pay more or less for some of those positions, but you don't have to pay them the same. One of the things that we do know, that when you come up with some kind of an alternate salary schedule like I'm talking about tonight, they're actually considered to be more financially sustainable than traditional salary schedules. Because when you think about that, there's no automatic step increases. So in the past, you had those automatic step increases, and you may have moved into a position, we have superintendents with us tonight, they may have moved into their school district, and maybe 80% of the teachers in the school were in the final 5 or 6 years of their career. And they're all making salaries at the top end of the salary schedule. And that's really going to impact the overall, strain on your budget, because all of them are at that level. Or vice versa, you may have moved in and they were all in the first 5 or 6 years, and you had a lot of extra money to do other things with. But you don't have a lot of control over that. You have a lot more control in a schedule that I'm going to talk about. The other issue, though, is it's much more difficult to design and implement an alternative salary schedule. A lot more work has to go into it. There is some record keeping that goes along with it. We have to talk to our staff about it, and we have to make sure that we get buy-in from everyone that, hey, this is the way we want to move forward in the future. But you can then use those cost savings that you get to pay for some of those outputs that we're talking about. So there's one thing we got to think about is, are we going to do a bonus? Are we going to do a stipend? How are we going to pay these people for these things that we're talking about if we want to implement some kind of alternate salary schedule? I saw a school district last year, talking with them. They were going to put in a retention stipend. They were going to pay people for coming back for the next school year. So anybody that comes back is going to get $2,000. I can't remember what it was, but it was a significant amount. And they gave that bonus in June. And guess what happened? They had an employee that left them then. They didn't come back for the school. When school started in August, they didn't come back. They took that bonus, they left. So the school district's trying to get that money back, right? But they didn't have anything written in their policies or their plan to get that money back. So when might you actually want to give that stipend? Maybe next year in September or October after that school year started, right? So you got to think about those kind of things. And then another thing to think about is, in a new type of salary schedule, the base compensation plus stipends may equal less than the person made in the previous year. They may qualify for less. And that would be unusual in the education world as well. So here's one example that I just pulled from Austin, Texas. This one doesn't have a lot of different elements in it, but it does pay for a person that comes back. So if you come back for another year of service, you're going to get some points for that. It also puts the teacher evaluation and the appraisal in there, and they put a lot of stock into the teacher evaluation and appraisal in the Austin School District. So you can see 6 different levels of performance there. They're going to impact how much money you make based upon your teacher evaluation. They also put some element in there on professional development, some leadership pathways. They don't really look at performance a whole lot. They're really focused on appraisal. I think that's really good, but I also think we're at schools, we're trying to get performance, we're trying to make sure our students know the material we're teaching each day. So the one that I've developed kind of concentrates a little bit more on student outcomes or performance. So this is the schedule that I put together this summer when I was meeting with the superintendents. It's based on a school of 1,000 students with 75 employees. So that's going to be a pretty good staffing ratio. We're going to have, about 1 employee to every 13 and a half students, I think somewhere in there. We'll be slightly below the matrix ratio of 1 to 14.4. So as you can see in this salary schedule, what we've done, we have a base salary of $50,000. We also calculate what that will cost us with benefits. So $50,000 with benefits is $62,500. That's the third column there. First thing we want to do is go back and put in some kind of experience stipend. I know that one of the rubs is, and with our current situation, has been veteran teachers did not get but only a $2,000 increase. We want to try to do something more for them in the future. This does some, not maybe as much as what some people want. Another thing I think about this year, and it's kind of off topic, I'm chasing a rabbit here, is, but you might do bonuses this year that are unequal and are more geared toward your veteran staff, if you have the funds to do that at the end of this first year into the LEARNS Act. That would take a vote of your staff, an unequal bonus, but it's something to think about. With this experience stipend, what I've done is I've lumped the experience into sections. 0 to 5, you'd get a $250 stipend. 6 to 10, $1,000 stipend. 11 to 20, $1,500 stipend. And then anything more than 20 years, then you get a $250 or $2,500 stipend per year. So just with that first base model, if it was $50,000 and I came back, then I got that additional money. And you're going to have to infuse this into the model that you've already adopted, because some of your teachers are making more than $50,000. So this was just based on $50,000 at that time. Put in a master's degree for only $750. You're free to put those in there. You're free to keep them out. I think most of the research tells us that just getting a master's degree doesn't really normally improve student education. I do see some value in it myself, but just put a small amount in there. I think one of the most important things for me in keeping continuity in the district, I would look at a pretty strong retention stipend. So a retention stipend of $2,500, maybe even $3,000 if I could afford it, right? So think about it. $50,000 base, but if I had 20 years more experience and I came back, I'm at $55,000 already, right? So I want to keep people in my system. I don't want teachers jumping from school to school. I want a staff I can build continuity with, so I try to make sure that people come back. Now let's look at a couple other areas. Performance stipend. Performance stipend is broken into basically two areas. The first is the evaluation. If you're distinguished on your evaluation, you get a $1,000 stipend the next year. If you're proficient, you get $750. If you're basic, you get $250. But if you're unsatisfactory, you're not getting any kind of increase, and you're going to be on an improvement plan, going forward. So it makes the teacher evaluation for the first time really mean something, and once again, our teacher evaluations should be done with fidelity, and they should be done well. We shouldn't have a bunch of distinguished evaluations if we're having a C or D letter grade. Next on the performance schedule comes what's happening locally with performance. So as a teacher, we're all in this building together, we're all teaching in the middle school, we get a certain level of student growth, everybody gets a $2,500 increase. And it wouldn't have to be an all or nothing. You could put an increase on there, $1,000 for this much increase, $2,500 for this much increase, whatever you wanted to do. Once again, whatever you value, whatever you want to see, then you put it in the schedule. Now we have student performance. So you get two different rankings. You get a growth ranking, you get a performance ranking. This could be if we reached a certain performance level in our school. We're an A school, we get $1,000. Everybody gets it in the building. We're a B school, we want to move up from a C to a B, we get $1,000, whatever you decide. Then lastly, for an individual teacher, student growth. So this would obviously be in a tested area. Might be a little unfair in some people's eyes because maybe the art teacher can't get it because it's not a tested area. The social studies teacher can't get this bonus because it's not a tested area. But the tested areas, there really is a little bit more, stress there because we are, in those tested areas, those test scores are what becomes our letter grade, right? So maybe we set a growth level that we want to see, and if you reach that growth level, we get $1,500. And once again, you might set two levels, maybe halfway there, $750, whatever. Once again, up to you. I didn't put a bonus or a sign-on, stipend in there, but in this case, if we had a teacher that qualified for the highest level of payment, they would go from $50,000 up to $61,750 for their pay. Now the question is, can we afford this? How do we know we can afford this? So look at that third column once again. With salary and benefits, this would cost us $77,187.50 for this teacher. So what I did over to the right is this. We did a calculation of all the funding we have coming in. We have foundation funding, $7.7 million, teacher equalization funding of $185,000. We got $550,000 in Learn's raise funding. So we got a total of $8.5 million in foundation funding in these one-off salary categories. What would it cost us to implement this salary schedule in our school? If everybody hit the mark for every different stipend, it cost us $5.78 million. What percentage of that is that of that $8.5 million that we have to spend up there at the top? Well, it's 68%. And remember, in those examples I showed earlier, well, we spent about 85%. Well, remember, that includes classified staff. So I tried to do a classified staff calculation for this school, and based on what I thought would be for this size school, it would increase salaries up to about 83 to 84% of our foundation funding plus our raise funding. So pretty much would be in line. So really, we could pay all our teachers at least $61,000 if they met all this criteria. And we could afford it as well if we had a really good staffing model. But if we had 80 employees, then we couldn't afford to pay those teachers that much money, right? We'd have to drop all these numbers a little bit. If we had 85 employees, we'd have to cut those numbers even further. So you can mix and match all this. You can use one piece of it. You can use none of it. You can go back to your traditional salary schedules with steps and lanes, or you can implement this over time. You could say, hey, next year we're just going to put in one thing. We're just going to adopt the experience stipends. We're going to group those by a number of years. We're going to add that back. We're going to do a retention stipend. That's all we're going to do for the next school year. Following school year, we're still studying this. We're still talking with our teachers. We're going to start putting in performance stipends. We're going to add that. The question I've gotten a couple times in some co-ops is, well, what happens when you know all your teachers are not going to be at this $61,750 level, right? They're not all going to meet all those requirements. And that's true. So then I have money set aside to do other things with, right? One-off projects. But I always got to keep in mind how much money I'm going to need to fund my salary schedule. So this is just kind of a different look at what might be possible. Obviously, you have local control to the utmost right now when it comes to salary schedules. You can create whatever kind of salary schedule you have going forward. And the great news is, it doesn't have to look the same from school to school. You decide what you value, what you want to see in your district, what's going to drive performance and growth in your school, and make teachers happy and want to be there. And that's the kind of plan that you implement. So I hope it's been helpful just to get a different perspective or a different idea tonight. I told a group the other night, now don't walk out of here going back to your district saying, well, that training said we need to really do something like this, or if the superintendent doesn't do it this way, he's doing it wrong. That's not what I'm saying tonight. There is no right or wrong way. Once again, if you don't get anything else tonight, do whatever makes your school district happy, and whatever you can afford going forward, it's going to make you successful.